He outlined a few things for you guys to do, adjusting the tax tables, everything from that to licensing pharmacy techs. Off first blush, do you see any opposition to that?
It's been a pleasure to work with the governor and the governor's staff. We're putting together a comprehensive list of MBRs. I think we're up to 4 or 6 that we're going to take a look at, and so those are all issues on our table. We've got some of our own issues that we're also going to be working on, but certainly some of the things the governor's talked about are things that certainly we've been talking with the administration on.
I think it's, from my perspective, this is not as much an MBR as it's more policy update bills that we're looking to work with the administration on. It's going to funnel through different committee channels that we have throughout, but we're ready and willing. We've been talking with the administration and working with them, and there's some areas that we're still having conversations on, and we'll continue to work through, but we're anxious to look at a lot of these initiatives, and I think they're ones that will continue to move our state forward. I mean, one of the issues, I think, and Chairman Smith and Sprague have worked really hard, and we've got a lot more work to do. It's on the drug epidemic, and we've heard a lot about it. We're going to continue to focus on that, and I think that will continue to be a priority and something you'll find that there's not a lot of differences between any of us on. So those are big issues that we want to continue to focus on, and education, both K through 12 and higher education, extremely important. Continuing on the 5% challenge and other things that Senate President, quite frankly, I got to credit, has led. Is going to be extremely important more now than ever because it's about meeting these workforce demands and jobs and making sure that we're matching those as things continue. We have a great record. Things are happening. The governor mentioned it himself, especially like new upcoming industries like Amazon are coming to Ohio, and that's something that we should be proud of. I know I am particularly, especially since they're looking at Wilmington, and we have to ensure that we're ready to meet those job demands.
But do you see any potential problems or opposition to, like, say, changing the tax withholding tables? I mean, long term, that's cost neutral from my understanding.
Yeah, well, look, it's complicated, but the short answer is changing the tax withholding tables is an upfront cost. We're going to have a debate as to whether that's the best utilization of that one-time money. Okay. I don't think there's any opposition between the House and the Senate and the governor on doing additional tax reform. The question is when and what that includes. The tax tables are something that it's relatively straightforward to do. It puts more money in people's withholding now. The question is, can we find a solution that isn't just temporary, it's also long-term? So we're going to have that debate. We're talking about using year-end balances to fund that. We're going to have some extra end-of-the-year fund balances, I think, and so that's one of the opportunities we're looking to do.
Governor mentioned congressional redistricting reform.
Look, the congressional redistricting issue is something that, in my mind, has always been a little different than legislative redistricting. Make no mistake about it. The legislature does the congressional lines as opposed to the apportionment board, which included legislators who did the legislative lines. That's why the Senate for 4 years pushed on legislative redistricting reform. Those standards that we put into doing legislative redistricting reform are important, and maybe there's something the legislature should consider. But when you're asking the legislature to stop doing congressional redistricting, that's a major change in legislative authority. So we're going to have to take a serious look at that. The legislature has always had the constitutional authority to do congressional redistricting. We're willing to talk about some standards and some parameters, but I think it's a much different problem to do what some have proposed and just move congressional redistricting outside the legislature. I don't understand what the benefit of that is to end gerrymandering. The real question is do you impose standards on how the legislature draws those lines? Don't forget, legislatively drawn congressional districts also have one other check and balance that an apportionment board type process doesn't, and that's the referendum system that we want to challenge. So to me, it is a more robust system where you don't have legislators drawing their own lines, you have legislators drawing lines for another elected body.
So do you view the current process as working?
No, I didn't say that. I said I think there's some ground for improvement and discussion. But I think the presumption that we're somehow going to take the whole process out of the legislative hands and move it to another, in some cases, less elected body or differently elected body is something that other people draw some criticism from. I am very, very protective of legislative prerogatives inside the Constitution.
Ditto what the President of the Senate said. We'll continue to have the conversations as we go forward, and as the President said, we'll be willing to listen and take those legislative priorities forward as the governor puts them forward and have the conversation. But I too am extremely protective of the legislature's ability. To me, it's apples and oranges looking at congressional redistricting versus our apportionment process. So it's something that we'll continue to take up and look at as we go forward in the future and have conversations about.
What conversations aren't being had right now? This has been discussed for a couple of years. What are we still missing in the conversation?
Well, I think it's what are those standards going to look like? What's the process going to look like into the future? I mean, it just doesn't happen overnight. It's a very complex, puzzle, if you will, and I think it's something that we still have to sit down and have a conversation. I truthfully have not had a chance to sit down in depth with the governor yet on his thought or vision for what his congressional redistricting reform looks like, and I think that's something both the president and I still have to have the opportunity to do.
Look, as somebody who helped go through the congressional redistricting reform last time, I bet as a second-tier player, it is a complicated process. And I think you can improve the process with some of the things we put in place for the legislative life, some of those rules and some of the process. I helped draft the current legislative redistricting rules, and so I understand those dynamics. It is a very different thing, though, when you talk about congressional districts. Because congressional districts, for example, you need to draw to the person. You don't get the plus or minus 5% that you get with legislative districts. So it changes that dynamic. So you have to make sure the rules are consistent. Look, a lot of those things could be put in place statutorily if the legislature is going to continue to draw those rules as ways that you have to put in place the methodology. It doesn't necessarily need a constitutional amendment. But look, I'm not opposed to that. I just think we need to have a little bit more discussion in a way that's going to make sense holistically across the line. But simply, in the legislature, it comes down to you have the votes to do it. If you're going to do it as a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3. I don't think we have 2/3 of the vote right now in the Senate to put that on the ballot for the voters to decide. And I'm looking at my leadership team, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of head shakes. That's the question: can you get legislative support? So people need to do more than just talk; they need to go out and get support.